streaming. There's some people in there. How many do we got?
It says 2 waiting. I see.
Okay. Wow. I hope it does. But see, we might want to actually do it either late, like the next one, or if we do it again later, or early. Like when I do early ones, sometimes I get pretty good amount of people.
Yeah, I'm available. My schedule's weird. Like Sunday through Wednesday, I'm working, but I get off Tuesdays at Wednesdays at 2, and then usually the rest of the week I'm around, unless I have family obligations or whatever.
Right.
But
And hey, I don't know. Well, I'll talk to you about it later. I need moderators for this stuff. You start to realize you need moderators.
yeah,
If you're ever interested.
even just I've done live streams with like I think at most 14 people were watching at one time, and even then I had people tell me afterwards like, "Do you see what was going on in that live chat?" I was like,
yeah,
no.
Yeah, I had. Well, I maybe 2 weeks ago I did one when I was just working on a video, and there was some, anti-Semitism stuff started flying, and I couldn't really tell what was going on. I ended up banning the wrong guy. So.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, oh, I think that might have been the wrong guy. And the problem is like it's so hard. Listen, anyone listening right now, if you want to have a big talk about the difference between Zionism and anti-Semitism, the YouTube chat might not be the best place to get in that nuanced conversation.
Right, yeah. No. Yeah, speaking of that, did you happen to see that video of I just saw it on Facebook. It was some sort of oh man, what was it? It was a protest where this woman who was calling herself a Native American Zionist, but she was she was Jewish, I guess, also. And she's like, "Oh, I'm a Zionist." But anyway, she was on the side of Antifa, and Antifa was harassing these pro-Trump demonstrators. And she's like, "Oh, well, they're not." He's like, "I think you're on the wrong side, like, because these guys aren't fond of Zionists, you know." And she's like, she just had no idea. She's like, "Oh, they're not hurting me." And he's like, "Okay, all right, whatever." He's like, "If I come over there, they'll hurt me."
Kind of I did not see that, but that's interesting. That's kind of the weird part of intersectionality, right? You get you have to. If you're someone who only lives by group identity, you have to stop and ask yourself, like, oh, which side of the argument am I supposed to be on here?
Right, yeah.
It's so ridiculous. Like, think for yourself.
Right. So, Robert, looks like we got a pretty good group to get started here. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know that you're looking to possibly run for Congress.
Yeah.
I know you from Above Top Secret forums where he does daily posts that are super detailed. The guy knows more about the Mueller investigation than anybody else I've ever talked to, including a lot of people in the media. So, yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I know a lot about the Mueller investigation because I basically don't have a life. But no, my name's Robert Noerr. I live in kind of rural Pennsylvania. I've lived here my whole life and decided I'm going to run for Congress. It'll be, if anyone's in the Pennsylvania area, it'll be the old District 5. Though we had some gerrymandering issues, so they're redistricting. So I'm not exactly sure what my district will be, but I'm going to start getting more information out there about running. My YouTube channel, it's just Robert Noerr, and it's spelled like, I think like, yeah, you had the name.
And I'll put the link in there. I'm going to put the link out there.
Good deal. The reason I started the channel was just basically 2 ideas. One is I know all these rural people, and they don't have time to look into politics whatsoever. And many of the stories even that we'll be covering today, it's so confusing. There's so much going on, and the political climate just moves so fast. Most people are working 9 to 5, get home, they have lives. They're not sitting around like me. I happen to have free time to look at this stuff, and I enjoy it. So I wanted to do a channel where they could maybe break down stuff in ways that maybe they could understand it and then go look. I don't want anyone to just take my word for something, but then they could go look for themselves.
Yeah.
And then also get those people on to have their voices, because who the heck's listening to them, right? Who's listening to the truck driver and what their opinions are on regulations, or the farmer,
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing was, I just wanted to, one of the things I think is really important. I happen to come from a rural area, but I was also involved in policy debate in university, and it's as left-wing as you could ever imagine. It's, if you think academia is left-wing, this is the ultra left-wing of the left-wing. And I was pretty successful there, but the thing that was important about that was I actually made a lot of friends, even though I was kind of like a cartoon character to them. They were like, oh, an interesting curiosity. But I made a lot of friends, and to this day, we could have arguments, at the bar or whatever, where we're, most of the time civil, but even yelling at each other. But you walk away at the end of the day, you're still friends. And I think we've lost that. We think that, as a society, it's like arguments are bad or debates bad. It's not. It's great. I would hate to only be friends with people that agreed with me. It'd be the most boring thing in the world.
Oh, it's so boring.
Yeah, that was basically it. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So, yeah, we were talking earlier a little bit about just the media and their supposed fact checks that are actually just biased spin of their own opinions.
Right.
And, I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
I was looking on News
Yeah,
Busters.
I mean...
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
No, I was looking on Newsbusters today. I don't know if you've ever been to that site. It's a great site. I highly recommend it. But, every freaking story that's coming out in the media is about their supposed fact checks. And if you actually dig into these, I mean, they're not actual fact checks. Like, I was talking about one of my videos. One of the supposed lies that Trump told was that, and actually, let me bring that up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know where you're going. I think I saw this video. I also did a video on CNN's fact checker, and I only found one fact personally that they were correct in pointing out that Trump wasn't right about. So,
let me see here real quick. Oh, okay. So this is something that PolitiFact says is false about Donald Trump. So Donald Trump said the Democrats want to invite a caravan after caravan of illegal aliens into our country, and they want to sign them up for free health care, free welfare, free education, and the right to vote. So they said this was false, and this is a hard false, because there's no invitation. So they took him at, like, literally at his word that Democrats sent out an invitation. And it's like, so they put out a lot of crap like that, and then they're like, oh, he lies all the time.
Right, and it's funny because they selectively decide when to take him at his word. Like, if you look at the fact checkers, you'll have something like that, for example, right, where they're like, oh, we're going to take him specifically at his word and say that that's technically a lie. But then, like, for example, CNN's fact checker said, well, Trump said that wealthy politicians have walls around their home. And
right.
CNN's fact checker's like, that's clearly an allusion to the Obamas, but technically they have a fence, not a wall, so that's a lie. Now, wait a minute. Trump never said Obama. In fact, I took it to mean he was talking about Pelosi, but right. Other politicians in general that are against the wall that have them around their home. But CNN says, oh, we know he met Trump, and oh, that's a lie. Right. Well, you can't just say, like, and they did that constantly. Like, it's constantly, they're claiming things that are lies that are opinions. Or, for example, Trump would say, like, here's a bunch of instances of crime being committed by illegals. And the fact checkers will say, well, actually, that's a lie because illegals commit less crime on average than actual citizens. Well, two things to that. One, that doesn't mean that what Trump said's a lie. Both things could be true. Illegals could commit a bunch of crimes. And second, you know what I mean? But second, that's a flat out lie on their part because they don't, when these fact checkers say things like this, oftentimes they don't even cite the studies they're talking about. And if you actually look, according to U.S. government numbers, when you're looking at federal crimes, it's actually that, like, illegal immigrants make up something like 47% of people convicted of federal crimes that don't include homicide. And those crimes also,
right. How
by
are
the
they
way,
getting
that's
their
not
identities?
Right. That's not even including that, by the way.
Okay.
That's just include. So those numbers aren't even including, like, the crime of illegally crossing the border or identity theft. So at the best, you could say, look, maybe there's different studies out there, but that's not a lie on Trump's part.
Right.
And they just say, oh, we're fact checkers. That's a lie. They don't show you the study. They just assert that. And I've heard that asserted 7-8 different fact checkers said that. It's ridiculous.
Well, they all
Trump
say
never
it.
said, yeah.
Yeah, it's an echo chamber. And, no, for the most part, there's nobody besides maybe Fox News out there really calling them out on anything. And so they can get away with it. They don't, most people just think that whatever comes from the media.
Fox's fact checker, right? They had Shep Smith do it, who's one of the biggest anti-Trumpers in the media. And so then, like, if you're on, like, Above Top Secret or anywhere online talking about this, people are like, oh, even Fox News says that Trump lied. No, the one guy at Fox News that, like, hates Trump more than life itself thinks that, Trump lied.
Well, any parse word, right.
And here's the thing, right? Like, oh, my dog's rooting here. That's a good thing. Fact-checking's a good thing. Who's against fact-checking? No one. Right. That's absolutely... But there's two things with it. One, you just want that equally applied. Like, that's a big message I end up saying a lot in my videos is just like, I just hate double standards. So, yeah, you guys want to grill Trump? I'm cool with that. But how about the next time there's a Democratic president, you do the same, And
exactly.
The other thing is you expect the fact checkers to be telling the truth. Because that's the entire. Now, granted, you expect the politician to be telling the truth in the first place, but fact checkers' only job is to basically be unpartisan, unbiased, not give opinion, and just say, here are the facts. And they're the exact opposite.
Well, it's disturbing that, Mueller and those guys say it's a post-truth world, and the media really came after him and Breitbart for, having that position. But they operate in that world on a daily basis. I mean, they basically just create their own truth, and they lie by omission. They create their own things and leave out anything that's inconvenient. And then all of them repeat it, and it becomes the truth.
I just saw someone posted a study that I was discussing with them that said that it's one of these studies that are like, oh, scientists at this university say that actually Trump supporters and elderly people push fake news more than Democrat supporters or younger people. And so you look at the study and it's like, well, the number one, like you just have to have an eye for this. It's like, okay, well, how do they define fake news? So when you read the methodology, they're like, oh, well, we determined fake news based on a list that journalists and academics gave us. Well, we know that journalists and academics lean heavily left. And we also know that a lot of mainstream journalists actually work for organizations that have committed some of the biggest fake news stories of the year. So it's like, how can we, basically you have a bunch of left-wing people just saying, and an echo chamber saying, yeah, the other side pushes fake news, but we're scientists or we're fact checkers.
Right.
And so that means you should prefer our interpretation. And that's not the case at all. They're just opinionated. That's all.
Yeah, we're scientists, and a man just had a baby.
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing that with climate change, I feel, now look, certainly there are non-science believers when it comes to climate change, but I feel that like straw man, a lot of times people will just be like, oh, if you have a question with the policies that come out as a result of climate change, then you're a science denier. And it's like, no, that's not it at all. I look at science, I believe it. But how can you on one hand say that, and then on the other hand with a straight face be like, yeah, there's no biological difference between men and women.
Right.
Like they don't get it. And this double standard applies all the time. For example, the last video you just did, I was just watching right before we came on, about Ana Navarro, like filing her nails, right? While they're talking about people that have been murdered by illegal immigrants. She can care less, just filing her nails. She'd be the first person to jump down someone's throat if they were like, didn't have compassion for a woman that was a victim or something like that. So it's selective outrage, and it's the selective application of their standards.
And it's funny,
that's what I find so funny.
Yeah, and she knows she's protected. She knows she can do that and get away with it. She has no fear of that. And that shows, they talk about privilege all the time. Well, that's her privilege to be able to do things like that. So, yeah. Yep.
And if you saw, and I know you did a video on this too. I did one as well, because to me, it was one of the most shocking things was Comey accidentally explaining to his audience why the Democrats are hypocrites about the wall. It's one of the best videos you'll ever see, where he basically is like, you can see it. His rejection to Trump's so strong. He's struggling in his own mind to figure out what he's saying, but he's like, I just want to clear something up. Basically the exact type of wall Trump's now suggesting has already been built in places, and the Border Patrol agents say it's successful, and they say that they want more of it, and the Democrats voted for that. But Trump's claiming that it's his idea, so Democrats won't vote for it. It's like, dude, you just outlined the case for why the Democrats are responsible for the shutdown.
Exactly.
But he can't be. To him, he's insulting Trump. He's like, oh, Trump thinks this is his idea. Yes, so do the Democrats, and that's why they're against it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's an example of meme magic coming true, because you'd see all these memes where it'll be like, Trump should come out and say water's bad or water's good. Democrats would hate it the next day. That's exactly what we see happening in real time.
Absolutely. It is.
So it's ridiculous.
And something else that's ridiculous about that whole thing is they keep bringing up the statistics about illegals committing less crime than Americans. And I looked for that study today, and I couldn't find it. If anybody knows where that study is actually located, if you want to post it in the chat, I'd appreciate it. But so they're basing that on a per capita basis, and yet anytime they can come up this recent shooting of the little girl, and they jumped on this, it's a white guy. Well, if you look at the per capita attacks on black people by white people, it's minuscule, and in fact, there's way more black people killing white people. And I'm not saying that in a way to there's something wrong with black. I'm just using it as an example of where the media is very selective and when they'll pull statistics like that.
That's right. That's one of the things. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The study that I think most of them are referencing was a Cato Institute study. Cato Institute's this libertarian think tank. And even though I kind of lean libertarian on some things, the Cato Institute's all for basically illegal immigration. They love it. Now, they're also against the welfare state. So it's kind of this, Milton Friedman was this economist, basically, that's a big influence of theirs. And I don't mind Milton Friedman's position, by the way, which was, sure, we should have unfettered immigration. Anyone who wants to come here could come here. But we also have no welfare for anyone whatsoever, even American citizens. And then his argument is, let the best workers win. Everyone else, tough luck. That's the idea that the Cato Institute's founded by. So they'll selectively take these studies. But if you look at that study carefully, which I'll try to link it here later, what it says is it's just basically taking a couple states and taking like 3 months worth of crime and saying, in Texas's 3-month examination of this crime, it turns out that illegals committed less crime than native citizens. But they don't have any idea how many illegals there are, for one, so it's hard to make a proportionality argument. And second, they can't even properly identify who's illegal when they arrest them. So it could very well be a lot of the people that they arrested had fake papers that they didn't catch that themselves were illegal. Plus, then you have to take into account that illegals probably, like every other demographic, commit more crimes against their own. And there's a less chance of illegals reporting crime than elsewise. Now, your point, though, is you're the only other person other than me I've ever heard say this, which is when you make that argument, when you say, well, illegals are basically better, they commit less crime. Okay, so it's okay to use demographic numbers now when citing statistics?
Yep.
Because let's take, then let's weigh illegals versus rural white people. Or let's weigh illegals versus inner city black people. All of a sudden, it looks like illegals fall in between those numbers, right? Now, if I were just to stand up and say, look, when we're talking about gun violence, actually a lot of that occurs in gangs and inner city violence. People will scream racism. I don't have a racist bone in my body. It's just a fact. But they'll say, you can't cite those stats. That's racism. But yet those same people without batting an eye will say, oh, illegals are so noble. They commit less crime than Americans, even though that's not even a true
They'll say white people are the biggest, terrorist threat. And it's like, well, no. I mean, you can make that argument, but let's break it down per capita. And no, white males are the largest majority in the country. And when they make that claim, by the way, they're counting prison violence. And that,
yes,
and that's where all that stuff's happening. It's not happening really in the real world. Yes, we do have some white mass shooters for sure, but and they want to call those terrorists. But there's no political or religious bias in these shootings, so you can't call them terrorism. I mean, I'm if they're horrible people for sure, but you just can't call that terrorism. And it's just funny to me how they'll manipulate data and facts like that just to suit their claims.
Well, that's why, definitions like terrorism, I get it. There's a reason to want to define things as terrorism because we have a different way of dealing with that as a government. Different agencies deal with that. But hate crime, for example, you'll hear these studies that the majority of hate crimes are committed by white people, which is probably true. But again, it's not looking at it proportionally. Right. And when you look at those studies, you're absolutely right. They're talking about things like prison violence. But it's all a trick in how you define it. The raw numbers are pretty startling that it's like, on average, a black person's something like 23 times more likely to commit a violent crime against a white person than vice versa.
Right, exactly.
But they could massage the definition of what a hate crime is, and that then makes it seem like the reverse is true. And it has real-world implications. If you look at this tragic shooting of this young girl, I think her name was Jasmine, who was shot in Houston, instantly this was put out as a hate crime. That I would never judge that family, If you have a child that's shot, God forbid, who knows what you say in grief? You're searching for answers to the most impossible situation.
Absolutely, yeah.
But they were like, it could have been a white person. And so all of a sudden you had Representative Sheila Jackson Lee and all these civil rights attorneys demanding a DOJ investigation into hate crimes and shouting racism, see how bad it is. And then when it turns out that it was just a gang shooting gone wrong by a black person, where are those people apologizing for stoking the racial fears?
Right.
Nowhere.
It was a drive-by shooting and then a drive-by media, a drive-by reporting because they did all that and then it just went off. And that also shows they don't really care unless they can get some sort of something political out of it. It's like or not Eric Holder, but who said that never let a good crisis go to waste. So and they don't.
Right. Well, and Sean King got involved in that, which you have to give at least Sean King some credit for this. He's a BLM activist. He's not worth getting into. Right. But anyways,
I think, we all know the polar bear. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. What they call him, Talcum X.
Talcum X.
But To his credit, apparently he shared the tip that he was investigating, shared a tip that led to the arrest. So good for that. But you have to ask yourself a question like, why did you get involved in this in the first place, Sean King? Now, we'll never know the answer. Only he would know. But it seems pretty fishy that if all the drive-bys where children are shot and the perpetrator was assumed to be black, he had nothing to say about it. But then the one time that there was national audience on, oh, it might have been a white person this time, all of a sudden he was down there offering money. And that's fine. He has every right to do that, by the way. I'm not criticizing it. It's just we're supposed to have objective journalists, and when they're searching for the story, it ends up making things really bad. It's like do you remember the UVA rape case?
Oh, yeah.
That ran in the Rolling Stone. They called it rape shopping. They went around to universities saying, here's the story we want. Now we just have to find it. Right. And they finally did. Someone made it up. But that's what news is now. They have a narrative, they have a worldview, and they're only looking for stories that fit into that view.
Right. And how did all that start? That started with the Duke lacrosse team. And that became a narrative that they wanted to perpetuate and continue. Because Yeah.
Yeah, and then you know, when you look at the campus rape stories, it turns out most of the I can't say I'm trying to get better at being precise in my language. Many of the stories that got national attention turned out to be hoaxes, right? Mattress Girl, Duke lacrosse, UVA rape hoax, and I'm not going to get into we could talk for 4 hours about like false accusations and how they damage people's lives and how that means we should operate in like the Me Too sense of things. But all I'm saying is, as journalists, you have to you can't be pushing that narrative. You're now making yourself part of the story. You're no longer a journalist then. And I think that's something me and you have talked about before, where you hear these journalists, they'll want to beat their chest and say, we're so important to the country and to democracy and, the First Amendment and this and that. And when Trump scolds us, he's hurting democracy because journalism's so important. They're not journalists,
Chicken
95% of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, and most of those people that are saying that before the election were saying that it would be a hit against democracy if Trump were to hypothetically challenge the election results. And they've gone 100 times far above and beyond that at this point. So, yeah, these people, when Trump says they're the enemy of the people, I agree 100%. And I've been saying it since way before he came around, but I think it's the truth. They are a big reason for the division in this country, if not the main reason.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I think that I agree with Trump in a sense that they are the enemy of the people, but not in a militaristic sense or anything like that.
Right.
But I also think that it's like Trump's right to call them out, but he should be more. I would like to see him be a little more diplomatic in that language, because when he says that allows them to then get on their soapbox, and that's fine for his base. Like people like me and you were like, yeah, he's absolutely right. But there's also a group of middle people that he needs to try to reach to get elected again. And I feel like some of them get lost in some of these insults and the petty back and forth, where instead of just saying they're the enemy of the people, he should just be like, here's what they said about Obama during the shutdown. Now here's what they're saying about me.
I agree.
Like, can you see the difference? And, you know, for me, the number one reason I voted for Trump was that I wanted to see him out the establishment for what it is, and including the mainstream media, which is part of that establishment. And that is that they're corrupt, that they're interested in maintaining their hegemony on power, and they'll do whatever they can to smear anyone that would jeopardize that power.
Absolutely.
And he's done that in spades, right?
Yes, absolutely. And to that point, actually, just to segue off that, this investigation into him and the fact that, you know, it started literally the day he was elected. I mean, it seems like it started.
Yep. Yeah,
it seems to me, and I thought from the very beginning that this is a setup. This is BS. They're just trying to undo this election. And to most people out there, it's hard to follow, like, literally everything. The dossier, you know, the FISA courts and all that. Can you just sort of summarize why you think that this is an illegitimate investigation? Which I think most people think it is, but tell us why.
Okay, so in order to, the best way to look at this, I agree with you. The problem is that there's so many names, there's so many technicalities, people are citing opinions as fact on the media so much, it's hard to follow the story. It's just very complicated. So, I've been thinking about it, and I'm trying to break it down real simply. So, the first thing you need to do is look at the difference between the Hillary investigation and the Trump investigation. because it's a sad state of affairs in this country, regardless of who's corrupt or which investigation's legit or not.
Definitely.
We basically had the two people running for president under investigation at the time that they were running for president, which is crazy. Not a good thing in a country. Though I would argue the investigation into Trump's illegitimate. But look at the double standards and how they were handled. That's, to me, where the real story is. And that's how you could tell that the Russia investigation's illegitimate. So in every single way that these were prosecuted and the investigations were, the methodologies that went about them, you could see on the Hillary side, they went as easy as possible. And on the Trump side, they went as harshly as possible.
And it was blatant. So, I mean, it was so
obvious.
Right.
Right. And now when you look, you can see that the agents involved at the time of the FBI, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Mueller, Andrew McCabe, all these people that were involved, we now know are rabid anti-Trumpers. Like you can see Comey on TV every day saying that. The same with McCabe. Peter Strzok, we got all of his text messages saying things. He needed an insurance policy against Trump being elected. He could smell Trump supporters in Walmart, things like that. Yeah. And Strzok actually did every major interview in both the Hillary and the Trump investigation until the point that he was basically fired. But just look at the double standards. For example, with the Trump investigation, the people we see ended up being charged were charged with crimes like this: lying to the FBI. So two of these guys, and they're basically, other than Paul Manafort, well, that's not true, I won't say it, but they're people that had varying degrees of importance in Trump's campaign. So, for example, Mike Flynn, who people probably know his name, and George Papadopoulos both got charged with lying to the FBI. Right. Well, we know for a fact, based on the FBI's 302s, which, believe it or not, the FBI doesn't record interviews. They just transcribe what happened in them like 5 days later, which, even if you don't buy into any of this corruption of the Trump thing, like, why in God's name, in a world where everyone has smartphones, are they not recording? It's just, it's nonsense.
It makes no sense.
The reason is because it's a tool for them. They're able to then switch words around and change the tone of it to make it appear how they want. Right. This person, they could make it seem this person seem more guilty or more innocent based on how they want. That's what the 302s are about. But anyways, we could see from the FBI's own 302s, Peter Strzok, this guy that rabidly hated Trump, his 302s show that both Mills and Abedin, who were both lawyers connected to Hillary, very close to her, lied to the FBI. They both said that, they both said that they had no knowledge of Hillary's server until after she was Secretary of State. But emails that have been released show that they knew as early as 2009 that she had that private server. Yes. And so that's a lie to the FBI, but they were granted immunity. You have another, Manafort was charged with failing to register as a foreign lobbyist. Now, this is a crime that's committed every day by countless people in Washington. It should be charged. I don't mind them charging it. That's a good thing. What this charge is basically is that you're operating on behalf of a foreign government or a politician in a foreign government, and you didn't file the proper paperwork, because our system says you could do that, but you have to file the proper paperwork. Well, in Mueller's indictment of Manafort, he says he worked with Group A and Group B. Group B is the Podesta Group. The Podesta Group is Hillary Clinton's campaign managers group. They literally committed the same crime together. Manafort gets thrown in solitary confinement. He's looking at possibly 20 years in jail. The Podesta Group was politely asked by the FBI to please fill out retroactive paperwork, and we're allowed to go on their way. Like, that's the kind of nonsense that you're like, and the way it's spun by the media is like, well, technically it's a crime. Technically it's a crime. Of course, I have no problem. My stance from the get-go is if there's Trump or anyone in his campaign that have committed crimes, charge them. I don't care. Right. That's the law is the law.
But we want
I just want it evenly applied. You know, and you also see,
real
for
quick,
example, they rated.
And not to interrupt you, I just wanted to real quick throw in there that what we've been talking about before about the media and how they're very selective, that plays into this because everything you're talking about, like the people who got immunity, you never hear about that. Like there's certain things that the media, if they want the people to know about it, they'll repeat it over and over and over. Other things, you never hear about it again. You got to dig into it like you have. And the vast majority of people are not doing that.
Well, and I've talked to you, like, you're focused heavily on the media, which I love. That's one of the things I love. And we talked about this, like, one of the reasons that I post a lot on online forums is also for a record for myself, just like you doing videos about the media, because the stories come so fast, you lose sight, you forget. So you'll go back and look at your own work from like 2 months ago and be like, oh yeah, I forget how insanely corrupt that was, because 10 more corrupt things have happened since then. And everyone's attention spans, even ours as well, it's so short you forget just the colossal buildup that you get. You were talking about immunity. Here's another thing, right? Like, people focus on, with Hillary, it's like, well, she committed a crime having the private server. She did, and Comey changed the language. That's all true. But look, I find the easiest way to talk to people and to explain things to people is just to make the most base case that you can without getting into the complexities. So if you start talking about our server, people will be like, well, we'll cite this law and that law, and you get into this really confusing argument. Here's all you need to know. Hillary Clinton's camp was asked by the FBI to hand over certain emails. 3 days after they were asked about that, they deleted those emails. That is the destruction of subpoenaed evidence. Now, if anyone else in the country does that, they go to jail.
Can you imagine if Trump
did that? Does that mean Hillary personally destroyed them? I'm not saying that. I'm saying someone should have went down for that. Absolutely. But they didn't. Now, the guy's name who did that, his name was Paul Combetta, and he was a tech guy that worked for her. And the FBI said the reason that they allowed Paul Combetta to destroy these was actually Hillary and Combetta had this group of emails set aside for months that they were eventually going to delete. But they didn't get around to it until 3 days after they were
They wanted to get rid of the evidence, but they just hadn't done it yet. So,
yeah, and that was the claim. So that flew. Well, then some lady that would be just someone like me than you, she's on Reddit, and she actually finds this Combetta guy's Reddit tag, his username, and he went by the name of Stone Tier. And he's on a Reddit channel, and he says something like this. I don't have the exact verbiage in front of me, but he says something like this. Hey, I'm looking for advice. I'm trying to take off a person's name, in parentheses, a very VIP, from a chain of emails. Is there any way to do this? And basically, people are giving him tech help, like, well, it's actually very difficult, blah, blah, blah. The day after he asked on Reddit how to basically remove Hillary Clinton's name from an email chain, he ends up deleting them all with bleach. Now, if that's not proof of premeditation, that the entire story they fed to the FBI was garbage, I don't know what is. But the FBI still refused to prosecute. And in addition to that, the FBI went out of their way to also destroy evidence. They promised Mills and Abedin, by handing over their computer and phones and things like that, that they would smash them with hammers afterwards, which they did. Now compare that to how they treated Trump during the investigation. They actually went into Trump's lawyer's house in the middle of the night with guns and raided everything. Right. That's how they got Cohen. And so, again, it's just this massive double standard is what you could see, how you know that it's illegitimate.
They start flaunting the double standard.
Right.
Which it makes you...
That's exactly right. And here's the thing, right? Like, I have for me, Trump is more than a person. Trump was a growing movement, and he happened to kind of be the avatar that came out of that movement, of people that are just like a populist movement, people that are fed up. And it's not just right-wing people. It's people that are fed up with PC culture. They're fed up with no one in Washington representing themselves. And they finally had a guy who was like, I forget who I heard talk about this. It was like basically Trump, Adam Carolla, I heard him talking about this, who's also great. He was like, Trump's like a comic book character. Like, you kind of want to say some of the things Trump says, but just in a more like civilized way. But Trump's like the comic book character that's just boom, he takes everything and just and so but because of that, I don't care if Trump it's not like if Trump committed some crime, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, everything that all of his voters believed in is wrong. No, not at all. Right. So I don't care. And part of I just want it to be a fair process. That's all. Part of what you see when I said when Cohen got raided, here's a billionaire, a Manhattan real estate billionaire who ended up running and winning president of the United States. That guy's committed some crimes in his life. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sure he's committed some financial crime. Like, and so if you would take every major politician in Washington and raid their lawyers in the middle of the night, how many crimes do you think you would find?
Let's do it. Yeah.
But that's my problem. They only selectively do it. And the question is why, so I go back to the reason I voted for Trump, like I was saying earlier, is because I wanted to out the establishment. Just a quick overview. My view is this, that at the highest levels, the Republican and the Democratic Party are basically the same. And they give us these bones to throw over, like gay marriage or abortion, things they don't really care about. But at the end of the day, important policy to them, like bailing out the banks or Federal Reserve policy, regime change wars around the world, they agree on those type of things. And so that's why, like, when you saw the banks being bailed out, I remember seeing this, I guess it would have been an early meme at the time in 2008, where it was like Barack Obama, bail out the banks, John McCain, bail out the banks, and then like the 5 other minor people that were running as third parties, and all 5 of them were like, don't bail out the banks. Right. But the media would have you believe that it's, there's only, everyone wants to bail out the banks. Both sides want to bail out the banks. No, that's just the establishment. So anyways, I'm rambling a bit, but that's what I thought. That's why I wanted a potential outsider. That's why, even though I despise socialism, I wanted it to be a Bernie versus Trump election, because it was like, yes, two outsiders. Like, and what happened? What's the end result? Because everyone's like, oh, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. That's not the way things are. Well, Bernie got screwed over in the primary by his own party, and Trump's been under investigation since before he was even in office, and they're trying to take him down by any means.
They literally had operatives at CNN passing questions on to Hillary during Bernie-Hillary debates.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it literally proves the assertion that all these supposedly conspiracy theorists had in the first place. There was an article the other day I saw. I wish I would have made a bigger deal out of it, but I think it was the Washington Post. And you could tell when you read an article, like the tone that they have. And this was a very jovial, like chuckling tone. And the headline was, every area of Trump's life now under investigation. Now, in order for you to be okay with that, you would have to assume that Trump's like the most corrupt person in the world. You might think he's uncouth. You might think he's corrupt. But do you really think he's any more corrupt than Hillary Clinton or John McCain, or name basically any national politician?
Right, before Trump came around, it was kind of just...
If he's not any more corrupt than them, we've literally just proven the point that they're going to go all out to take him down. And why? Well, Chuck Schumer, and here's another thing where you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to be scared of this comment. Chuck Schumer goes on with George Stephanopoulos right after Trump gets elected and says, I don't understand why Trump's criticizing the intel community. Doesn't he know they could find 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you? That's literally one of the heads of the 2 major parties in this country telling the president, hey, man, you can't criticize the intel community because they will go after you.
Right.
That should frighten every American. That means that our president's not allowed to call out these people because they'll find ways to get them. And everything that we've seen as a result since that in the Mueller investigation and the FBI investigation has bore that out.
Oh, yeah. And, it's like, it's as if, and not to go back to media, but that's my thing. But the media, it's like before Trump came around, it was always we always just assumed that politicians were corrupt. Politicians lied. When Democrats got caught in lies, media would say, all politicians lie, right? But it's like this sort of rule within that community. If they want to, and I think this is how they're getting a lot of Republicans, never Trumpers, to join them, is that they're like, well, we're not going to hold you to that standard. We don't normally do it. We'll keep that stuff on the down low. But if we want to bring that to bear, we can. And that's what they're doing.
Right, like take an issue that's easier to understand, that's not complicated, like lobbyist money that's coming from Silicon Valley, like Google, Facebook, that type of money. Now we see story after story about all this bad, corrupt stuff that's going on at Google, Facebook, other places like that. Whether it be censorship of conservatives or even progressives that aren't establishment Democrats, or them allowing Russians to use their platform, etc. Like both sides have reasons to complain, is what I'm saying. Yet nothing's ever done. Why is that? Well, if you go to opensecrets.org, it turns out you can see, they're both both sides are getting massive donations from these. No one wants to end the cash cow. No, they don't want, if you're the Marco Rubios or the Paul Ryans of the world, you don't really want to bust the Hillary Clintons of the world for the exact same things you're doing.
Exactly.
That's why someone like Trump's dangerous, because he comes in and they don't know what he's up to, right? That's
Nailed it right
there. Only time universal praise is when he's doing things that the establishment wants, such as bombing Syria. Mm-hmm. That's the only, go back and look at the footage after he launches bombs in Syria. I thought it was the worst point in his presidency.
I know.
But you could turn on Fox News and CNN and they're both like, this is the most presidential that Trump's acted. When he's killing people, when he's bombing people with...
Which is baffling if you were around during the George W. Bush years. Because it's like, we went from total anti-war media, totally anti-war left, Democrats, there was protests almost daily, national protests against war. You get to Obama, suddenly war, you don't even hear about what the hell is going on in the Middle East. Like, he's in Syria, he's in all these places.
Irony, right? Who pushed those wars in the Middle East? Like, people say Bush, Cheney, the neocons, but it was actually the intelligence agencies as well. Your CIA, that's who pushed it. Those are the same groups now that the media, and I'm not making this up, you could go look at clips of it, the media is telling you to even question the intel community is hurting America. Mm-hmm. So they told us after Iraq, they said, And the media had this like mea culpa where they were like, our bad. We should have pressed harder leading into the war to Iraq. We shouldn't have just taken these people at their word.
Right.
We'll never let it happen again. And now where are we? 12 years later, taking their word for everything, and not only taking their word, saying, "Oh, and to question it means you're anti-American and you're hurting America."
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just nonsense. The other thing, like I could go with probably today wouldn't be a good day to go into it, but I can literally go into every single player in the investigation and what's up with them. But there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about in general other than that.
Please.
The first is there's some things that led into the investigation into Trump-Russia. So the first would be this idea of the dossier. And for those of you who don't know, there was a dossier that ended up getting reported on at first, I think BuzzFeed was the first ones that ran it entirely, but CNN ran the story without the specifics. And it was that Trump was getting peed upon by hookers in a bed that Obama once slept in. And the idea was that this somehow meant that Russia would compromise Trump. Right. Was the idea behind it. So they ran this story, and then it turns out that the dossier had all this other salacious details and said basically that Trump was working with Putin to steal the election with his people. That's what the dossier said. Now, that was basically the impetus for the media's start of the investigation. That's when all the Russia came out. Well, there's a couple things to say about this. The first is, I can't remember the name of the book. I'll get it to you eventually. But there was this book where they wrote about Hillary losing the election, and it's talking about election night, how she's in her hotel room and she's with her strategist, and they came up with that night the idea of, okay, we got to start smearing Trump hard with Russia because they lost, and they needed to come up with a reason why they lost. It couldn't just be the Americans found Hillary Clinton to basically be the most unpalatable candidate that's ever ran for the president in the United States. So much so that a reality TV show
They had to keep up this veneer of being the elite in charge of everything. Yeah.
That's right. Yep, absolutely. And so that's where it started. And then second, we see the dossier was the start of the media. Now, it'll get confusing later because people say, oh, no. But the FBI investigation actually started before the dossier. But for now, all you need to know is the way me and you and everyone started to hear about this was through the media. And their start of it was this dossier. Well, how did they learn about the dossier, though? That's the question. Well, there's a guy that goes by the name of John Clapper. John Clapper was the head of the NSA, I believe. Or he was director of national intelligence, DNI, director of national intelligence is what he was. And he's a rabid anti-Trumper. He, by the way, keep in mind, speaking of double standards, Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, has been charged with lying to Congress. DNI Clapper was the one who famously went in front of Congress and said, nope, the NSA is not spying on Americans, not willingly. That's what he said. A blatant lie. Where are the calls from the media to charge him? Instead, he's got a spot on CNN. Anyways.
Absolutely.
So he goes to CNN. He goes to CNN and says, hey, here are the details of this dossier that the intelligence agencies have. And CNN's like, wow, this is some really salacious stuff, but we can't run it. Because it's just there were stories about Obama that were really salacious too. Like there was this story that he had sex with a man named Larry Sinclair, and it was like all over the internet. And this Larry Sinclair guy was like a male prostitute, and he's out there like, yeah, I had sex with Obama, paid me to have sex with him or whatever. And this went all through the media, but the media was like, look, we can't run this. You need to have some kind of proof before you make a crazy sexual allegation like this. Right. So when they see the dossier and all these P stories, they're like, even CNN was like, okay, we can't run this, And so Clapper then goes to James Comey. And this is all public knowledge now. It's been released from testimony.
Yep.
Clapper goes to Comey and says, hey, you should talk to Trump about this dossier, especially about these P allegations. And Comey's like, oh, okay. So whether Comey was in on this or he was just duped by Clapper, it doesn't really matter. He goes and he talks to Trump about the P dossier. He doesn't say all the other allegations. He doesn't say, we're afraid that your campaign has been infiltrated by Russians. Why you wouldn't say that to someone running for president is president is beyond me, right? Look at by the way,
didn't they warn Hillary or something about that?
When she had a Chinese spy in her camp, what did they do? Yeah. They went to her and said, my God, you have a Chinese spy. Let's get him out. Yep. Here's what we could do to help you. But with Trump, it was the exact opposite. We're just going to spy on him,
And wasn't it under the Clinton administration that we lost all of our nuclear secrets to China? Didn't that happen during Clinton's administration? And you don't hear about that. That's another one of those things that if they wanted to constantly remind people of, they could, but they don't.
Right, and with Feinstein, like, Feinstein, for example, we know she voted pro-Chinese policies over and over again.
Right.
And she had a Chinese spy working with her. So if ever there was a reason for the FBI to be like, scratch their chin and do a little investigating. But no, instead they went right to her. You know, with Trump, they sent spies, they had wiretaps, all of that. And they never bothered to tell Trump, we think Russians are trying to infiltrate your... Now, if you're really concerned about Russians infiltrating a candidacy for presidency of the United States, you would go to the candidate and say, dude, you might have some bad people in your campaign that are working as spies.
Unless
but
you're
they don't
set up.
Right. That's exactly why. Right. So anyways, Comey does the talk with Trump. Clapper then, and we now know that this... We don't know that it was Clapper. CNN then says that a, quote, very high-ranking intelligence official then talked to them and said that Trump was briefed on the dossier. And that was the hook they ran the story with. So Comey actually interviewed Trump and said, hey, I just want to let you know that CNN's sitting on this document that says all this crazy peace stuff about you. They're just looking for a reason to run it. And then that very fact that Comey said that was the reason they had for running it. Because Clapper then went back. He's the one who told Comey to do the meeting. And then he went back and told CNN, okay, now the president's been briefed on it. You should run this story. And that's exactly how this all started. That was the start of the media. Now, Comey, if my interpretation is that Comey was in on it in the first place, because if Comey wasn't, wouldn't you be pissed if you're the director of the FBI and you're like, oh my God, people are going to hurt our president by running this story. I have to brief him. And then you find out that very briefing was used as the reason that the media reported it. Exactly. You'd be furious. Yeah. But instead, Comey's just like, oh, well, you know, whatever.
Darn.
Yep. So that's the actual start of the media's investigation.
And it sounds like the media's, I mean, it sounds like they're involved and implicated. I mean, CNN, at least, BuzzFeed. I mean,
they certainly are. We know, for example, we know that the dossier was used to get a wiretap on a guy on Trump's campaign. His name was Carter Page. Now, in full honesty, Carter Page, by the time they were able to wiretap him, was no longer a part of Trump's campaign. And this is a big anti-Trumper argument you'll hear constantly. They'll say, oh, they didn't spy on Trump's campaign. The guy wasn't there anymore. Well, yeah, but by having a wiretap, they still get all communications he would continue to have with people in the campaign. Plus they have, I forget what they call it, but it's basically like this two-step rule where they're allowed to also get all the communications of anyone you talk to. So it's not just you. It's you and all the people you're talking to. And they got all of his communications from when he was in the campaign. So basically it was a fishing expedition to get whatever they could. Well, one of the reasons they justified that dossier was they cited a Yahoo News report by a guy by the name of Michael Isikoff. That Michael Isikoff said that he had sources that backed up a lot of what the dossier was. Well, it turns out the FBI knew that those sources were Christopher Steele, the guy who wrote the dossier in the first place. Oh. So the media acted in cohorts with the FBI to pretend that they had a separate source verifying the information that the FBI had. But in reality, it was just the FBI's source in the first place.
Right. They're just creating all of this for themselves.
Right. Yep. So that's exactly what we see. The other thing is the other reason. What is the reason for the investigation in the first place? And like, again, Above Top Secret's the site I'm on the most where I'm talking about stuff like this. But just ask people, like, if you're an anti-Trumper, be like, what was the reason for this investigation in the first place? That's it. Because my feelings, like, I respect more people that I disagree with that are at least consistent in their opinions and don't have double standards than I do people that I disagree with, but at least, you know, they're consistent. So I just ask people and they'll say, you'll get responses like this. Actually, it's because Trump and his people had so many shady connections to Russians. That's why. Okay. Well, I could point out, like, some of those very same Russians and many more had connections to the Hillary campaign.
Exactly.
So why isn't she under investigation? And so, for example, the entire idea is the Trump Tower meeting, right? And what this was Don Jr. and I think Jared Kushner was there as well, decides to have this meeting with a Russian lawyer who's supposed to give them dirt. And the emails, it looks like she's basically claiming, yeah, I'm really high connected in the Russian government and Russia wants Trump to win and we got some information on Hillary. And Don's like, sounds good. That's not a crime. How do we know, for example, if Trump Jr. would have got that dirt and it showed crimes by Hillary, he wouldn't have taken that dirt and immediately went to the FBI and said, hey, here's the criminality that Hillary Clinton's up to. So it's not a crime just to hear someone out. He goes to the meeting. It goes for 8 minutes, and the woman's just rambling on about nothing, about the McGinsky Act. Adoption, right. And so he just leaves. He just up and leaves. And that's them saying, see, the fact that the Trump campaign tried, unsuccessfully, mind you, but tried to get dirt from Russians, that's what this is all about. That's the collusion. And then for a year, we had this dossier, and we didn't know who funded it. We didn't know who funded it. And the Democrats and Hillary's campaign were saying, not us, not us, not us. After a year of lying, we find out it was them. And who's the source? So what they did was they paid a firm to get another firm to hire a British spy to go to the Kremlin and talk to Kremlin officials to get dirt on Donald Trump.
I know.
And they actually got the dirt. So we're led to believe, on one hand, Don Jr. trying to get dirt from Russians on Hillary is the reason for this 2-year-long investigation that we're having. But Hillary actually paying for and getting dirt on Trump from Kremlin agents is perfectly fine. And that's not reason for any investigation whatsoever.
Yep.
It makes no sense.
I think they rationalize it by saying, oh, well, Hillary was just trying to stop a guy who's a Russian collaborator. And in their minds, that's how they're rationalizing it, you know?
Right, but even the FBI, like all the intelligence agencies, said that the conclusion was they did seem to favor Trump, but more than anything, they just wanted to meddle in the election.
Right.
That's what our own intelligence
they had
agencies said about Russia.
They had anti-Trump protests that they organized.
That's right.
So
that's right. And I warned people, like, we can get to that too, the Russian trolls, but I warned people that were flipping out about that. I said, watch yourself, because you think it's cool now because you're like, oh, the Russians worked with Trump. Because guess who else now they're starting to say the Russians work with? Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ. So does that mean we could throw all those movements to the sides as Russian pawns as well? That's why you have to be careful when you're making these ridiculous claims. Well, see, if they're working with BLM, well, BLM are still noble people. They're great. They're just concerned about cop violence. But if they're working with Trump, or working with's not the right word, they're advocating for Trump's stance, then that proves that somehow Trump's a Russian collaborator. Nonetheless, if you're James Comey or Mueller, and you're actually, keep in mind, the actual scope of Mueller's investigation, the first thing is he's supposed to be looking into Russian influence into the 2016 election. Now, then it goes on to say you also have the ability to investigate any crimes that arise in your investigation of that. Well, that doesn't say just Russian influence that benefited Trump. That says Russian influence, period. So, for example, we could take Paul Manafort, who was connected to this Russian oligarch named Deripaska, and there's all kinds of shadiness that supposedly that the anti-Trumpers say occurred between these two. Mm-hmm. But we know for a fact that Mueller actually possibly broke the law in like 2014, working with, or before that even, 2012 maybe, working with that very same oligarch, Deripaska, as did Andrew McCabe, who was his second command, that actually paid Deripaska money, and Deripaska worked on behalf of the FBI. We also know that Deripaska worked heavily with the Podesta group and deals. So why are we investigating Deripaska's connections to Trump-connected people, but not Hillary-connected people? The exact same people. And here's another example. This Russian that Don Jr. met at the tower, her name is Veselnitskaya. Her attorney was Fusion GPS. That's the law firm she hired. That's the exact same law firm that came up with the Steele dossier. So she had dinner with the leader of Fusion GPS the day before the Trump Tower meeting and the day after the Trump Tower meeting. And yet I forget his name now, but the owner, Greg, is it Simpson maybe? But he says, he testified in front of Congress. Oh, but we didn't talk about the Don Jr. meeting. Are you kidding me? This is the highest influence person that she would have talked to about the McGinsky Act and about these adoptions. She's been working with this lawyer for over a year on this. She has dinner with him before and after the Trump Tower meeting, and it doesn't even come up as an aside. Oh, by the way, I met Don Jr. last night and pushed what we've been talking about for a year. It's a blatant lie. And then, by the way, the only reason that Veselnitskaya was allowed into the United States was because she was originally not allowed to be in because she was feared to be a Russian agent or a member of the Russian politics. But Loretta Lynch actually signed a waiver allowing her to come in. So the whole thing looks like a setup from the get-go that they set Don Jr. up so that they could use this later as an excuse to investigate the Trump campaign, saying, see, he's trying to work with Russians.
Right. And same thing with Papadopoulos. It kind of seems like with him that he got set up. But initially I thought that, but he pled guilty, didn't he?
Yeah, well, Papadopoulos pled guilty to lying to the FBI, but and it's much in the same as Flint. So what you have to understand is, like, everyone says that the FBI could basically ruin your life by dragging you through an investigation. It's like I don't know anything about law enforcement. I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but you watch like the First 48 or Law and Order or stuff. Granted, I know Law and Order is fictional, but the idea is always you charge people with higher crimes in the hope that they'll plead guilty to less. So the FBI could basically just be like, we're going to charge you with crimes that you're going to spend 40 years in if you plead guilty. And so even if you're not guilty, you're going to have to spend millions and millions of dollars and have your name dragged through the mud for years. Or you could plead guilty, like Papadopoulos did, to lying to the FBI and spend 4 days in jail.
Yeah.
Right. So he spent 4 days in jail. But he didn't. right? The Papadopoulos story. I mean, here's another story. Everywhere you look, and I guarantee you, every single character involved in this, because you constantly hear people say, well, the Mueller investigation, look at all the people they found guilty. Not one person's been found guilty of working with the Russians to influence the 2016 election. There were Russian trolls that were posting on Facebook that were charged.
Yeah, they spent $10K on ads, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's a total joke. But all the people connected to Trump that have been charged, most of them have been charged with crimes that occurred well before Trump was running for office. In fact, most of those crimes, such as Manafort as a foreign lobbyist, he was, like I said, he was working with the Podesta group. Do you know who the politician they were lobbying to was? Well, she was Secretary of Defense at the time, or Secretary of State at the time. Her name was Hillary Clinton. That's who they were going to. So Mueller found out that basically Manafort was illegally lobbying for Russian interests to Hillary Clinton and her cohorts. Yet somehow that's more of a smear on Trump than Hillary Clinton. It just makes no sense.
Look, it all comes down to the media. If the media wanted these facts that you're laying out to be in everybody's consciousness, they can make it so. Or they could just not. They could just bury it, which is what they do.
Right. And so, like with Papadopoulos, here's what we see. On face value of the Papadopoulos story, keep in mind, he only pled guilty to lying. So he didn't plead guilty to doing anything terrible. On face value, take everything else away from it. Here's the bare bones of the story. This guy's a low-level dude. He starts going over to Europe, meets this guy, professor. The professor's like, hey, I have someone I want you to meet. Introduces him to this lady. Lady's like, basically, all these people are basically trying to get him laid the whole time, by the way, which is like straight out of a James Bond movie or something. But the lady's like, let me introduce you to this guy. Introduces him to someone who's supposedly a Russian operative. This Russian operative tells him, hey, we got dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of emails. Papadopoulos basically tells the Trump campaign he heard something like this. They're like, yeah, don't do anything with that. We think it would look bad optically. Then later, he's at a bar with this guy, Alexander Downer, who happens to be a big Hillary Clinton donor and friend. And he gets hammered, and he says he doesn't even remember what he said, but the details were basically he said, hey, I was hanging out with this Russian, and he said he got dirty emails on Hillary.
Yeah.
Now, we're told that that's the start. That was the FBI's start of the Russia investigation. That's what they claim was the start. Mm-hmm. So according to them, the only thing
that was in the news at the time, right? I mean, that was kind of out. Wasn't that kind of out there at the time anyway? I mean, it was on the internet. Yes. I mean, it wasn't like breaking news.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. That's so the crucial. Well, I'll just say this real quick. So what the FBI is saying then is, anytime, all it would take was to have some low-level drunk person in a campaign say, some guy from another country told me they got dirt on our candidate or the opposing person's candidate, and now the FBI is allowed to spy on that campaign, wiretaps, send spies physically in, launch investigations that last for over 2 years, leak information to the press, unmask people's names. Everything we've seen, it stemmed from this, from some drunk saying, I heard they have dirt. And you make the absolute best point. The reason that they say that, well, this is all justified because it turned out that like a month later, WikiLeaks released John Podesta and the DNC hacks. But if you're a Russian, right, and you're trying to just spread crap, or you're a disinformation agent of any nationality and you're trying to spread crap about Hillary, what you would say is, you know that it's been blasted in the media for over 3 years now that she had a private server, that she had a private email, and that foreign nations no doubt hacked it, which we now know, according to the investigations, that it does seem like the Chinese and other people did hack Hillary's private server. So if you were going to make up a claim about having dirt in Hillary, and you know all this information about the private servers out there, what are you going to say? You're going to say, yeah, I got emails of Hillary's dirt. Notice he didn't say, we hacked John Podesta and we have his emails, or we hacked the DNC and we have their emails. He said Hillary's emails, which never came out.
Yeah.
And so the entire justification, and now it even gets shadier with Papadopoulos, because it turns out that this guy, Stephen Halper, who ended up, we now know, was an undercover FBI agent, was sent by the FBI to spy on Papadopoulos as this is all going on. The professor, Joseph Mifsud, that was the person who put him in contact with these Russians, turns out to have all kinds of connections to the intel community through, like, I forget the name of the school that he worked at, but that it's notorious for basically working with France and the CIA and their intel communities. He lobbied for Hillary Clinton and things like that. Suddenly this guy he didn't, let me be precise. His best friend lobbied for Hillary Clinton. And all of the people that worked with him in this school were like, what? This guy was Russian? He's always rambling on. He disliked Russians. He was like a real pro-American guy. But apparently now they're like, we can't believe that. And so the whole thing, for again, it's all these, it's every single level. It's like you have the other side connected to the same Russians. You have intel people influencing people connected to Trump's campaign, trying to deal with Russians. Like just like Veselnet's guy, you had connections to Hillary people. You have this Mifsud and Halper that had connection to the intel people and things like that. It's terrible. I mean, we can talk. You could literally go for hours on just how crazy some of this stuff is. The connections to it.
Right, just the connections alone. Like even if you don't like Trump, it's like okay. So these standards applied to the other side, and it's like a 5-alarm fire. Like, how can you not? How can you not focus on that? I don't understand why the Republicans haven't focused more on that. I know that there are investigations and stuff ongoing, but the recent talks that they just did about the hearings that they had about the investigations. Well, I mean, where did that lead? It led nowhere.
Well, Schumer told you why they're not investigating. Because if you investigate the intel community, they'll find 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Right. That's the whole thing. They're either involved in the establishment or they're scared to death of them.
So the Republicans are just doing hearings that are just basically for show to please the constituents, but they're not going to really go because they're scared and they're afraid it's going to blow back on them basically, right?
Well, I think you had people that were really trying to get to the bottom of it. Like you had Devin Nunes, Goodlatte seemed like he was trying to get to the bottom of it. Yep. You had Trey Gowdy, who's not as like Nunes and them are basically, or Meadows would be another one. They're basically like gung ho, we're on Trump's side. Gowdy's somewhere in between where he's like, I think there's some real shady stuff going on here, but he's not necessarily like a cheerleader for Trump or anything like that. Yeah. So you definitely had these people, but they're being obstructed every case because you have they need kind of the Marco Rubios and the Paul Ryans of the world to get on board for it to actually carry real weight. So basically what happens, and this isn't just, by the way, with the Trump-Russia stuff, this is true of the intel community in general. Congress, who has oversight over these agencies, will say, hey, we're requesting these documents. And the FBI basically says, F off, you're not getting them.
Right.
And then they're like, well, no, we're asking
really
nice,
redacted.
Right. Can you please give it? No, we're not going to give it to you. And so they fight for years and years. And then they get the documents and they're redacted. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Can we see it unredacted? And the FBI says, nope, it would reveal sources and methods. People's lives would be put in jeopardy. And this is a lie. We know it's a lie because they made claims like this. And then we actually saw what some of the things that were redacted. Like, here's some of the things that the FBI said had to be redacted or it would jeopardize FBI agents' lives. They paid $45,000 for a table. That was redacted in one of their documents. Now, whose life was in jeopardy by releasing that? No one, but it did embarrass the FBI. Could it be that the FBI and other intel agencies are redacting information that makes them look bad? Yeah. Of course it could be. Of course that's what's going on. But they hide behind this facade of, well, we can't tell you anything because it'll be damaging for us. Now, you would expect the one group in the world that would not take that for an answer would be journalists. Yet they're the ones pushing the hardest, saying, if some guy like me is like, boy, does a YouTube video where I'm like, I'd really like to see what's under those redactions. They'd be like, shut up. Don't question the FBI. You're hurting sources of methods. You're damaging America.
Unless it's a Republican and somehow the shoes are on the other foot and they can get back at Republican. If they're going after Republicans in some way and they think the intelligence community is helping Republicans, then it would become a national issue. Then the media would get all over it. Just like George W. Bush years.
That's absolutely right.
Just go back and look at that.
The Iraq War, right? After the Iraq War, it was, the intelligence community bad. They're bad. They're bad. Right. Because they saw that as being an ability to hurt the Republicans and benefit the Democrats. Well, now the shoe's on the other foot. And, let's see. I mean, I always say, like, imagine, Trump. Imagine then now that we're going to have a Democratic Congress, you'll have Democrats in charge of the Oversight Committee in the House. Imagine Trump just being like, yeah, okay, we're just going to have my DOJ and my FBI just redact all this stuff that you want to see. Oh, and by the way, if you subpoena evidence from me, I'm just going to destroy it. Imagine what the media, what the outrage. They would be like, this is literally Hitler. Yes. This is literally fascism. He's censoring all. The press can't have access to all this information. And you can see that it's another double standard, which I'm sure you know all about, which is, they keep talking about how anti-press Trump is. Like, Obama went after more press whistleblowers than all the presidents before him. He actually wiretapped James Rosen from Fox News for running stories that were anti-Obama and actually wiretapped Rosen's family, his parents. Yeah. Like, Trump hasn't done anything that we're aware of to that level. Yet, right. If Trump says, Jim Acosta, get out of here, you're a jerk, all of a sudden he's attacking free press.
Oh, when Obama, he hired Anita Hill as a communications director, and immediately, as soon as she was on, it was the war on Fox News. They literally called it the war on Fox News. Yep. And it was like
Yep, you're
daily
absolutely
press
right.
briefings were going after the critics of the president, and the media was all for it because they were also going after the critics of the president. And we're just going to see this,
So
this
the only
cycle.
other two things, the only
go
other
for
two
it.
things, like really, I mean, you can get in the weeds with a lot of this, but really on the Mueller investigation is, how did it start in the first place? That's worth talking about. Just real quick is, Mueller got fired. Rosenstein wrote the letter recommending firing Mueller. So basically, if the names are confusing to people, Comey's the head of the FBI. No one likes him. The Republicans and the Democrats hate him because he came out before the election and basically said Hillary was under investigation again. Republicans don't like him because he went out of his way to make sure Hillary was found innocent. So no one likes the guy. Trump basically goes to the deputy attorney general and says, hey, should we fire this guy? And the deputy AG's like, yep, let me write you something up. Trump fires him, and then that's used as the impetus for the special counsel. So I told you what the start of the FBI investigation was. Now, the reason Trump wanted to fire Comey, and this is where Trump gets into trouble, he can't keep his mouth shut. So he's like, yeah, it was over the Russia thing, he said to, like, Lester Holt or someone. I can't remember who he said it to. But what he meant by that, and this is the truth, like, at least in my opinion, but I think it makes sense. Comey admitted that he was constantly telling Trump, dude, you're not under investigation. You're not under investigation. But if you turned on the national media every night, it was Trump's under investigation for colluding with Russia. So Trump's constantly asking Comey, like, hey, man, can you just get in front of a camera and say Trump's not under investigation?
Right.
Comey
Like anybody would.
He wouldn't do it. And Comey even testified that Trump actually told him, by the way, if you find any people in my campaign that were colluding with Russians like that, nail them to the wall.
Yeah.
Like, Comey testified that Trump said that. So the entire thing with Trump was just like, dude, I didn't do anything with Russia. Can you please tell people that? And Comey's like, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. So Trump got fed up with it and wanted him gone. Rosenstein wrote the letter to get him gone. That was called obstruction of justice, which it is not. The president has the right to fire anyone under him for any reason that he wants.
Right.
And even Comey admitted that the FBI investigation continued to go on with Russia, because the idea of obstructing justice is, well, what justice is being obstructed? Well, the investigation into Russia. Even Comey admitted, nope, the investigation not only continued, but actually got stronger after he left. And how is it obstruction if the deputy AG is the one who recommended the firing? Yeah. It's not like the deputy AG was like, I wouldn't fire this guy, and Trump said, screw it, I'm going to do it anyways.
It smells like more setup for a guy who's kind of naive of the whole, like, what's going on. And it just seems like that's the theme that we see over and over, is that Trump's kind of naive of how it works. And people recommend... Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and Trump just wants to be liked, I think.
Yeah.
Like, he's not an ideologue.
He's a simple guy.
Like, that's why the Dems made a huge mistake in the first place, going after him and treating him like Hitler. If they would have just kissed his butt, he would probably, like, went their way with a lot of these decisions. He would love to be the guy that's, like, at the Oscars that everyone's cheering for and going on Jimmy Kimmel and everyone's laughing and having a good time. Like, Trump would love that. He just wants to be liked. And so when he's talking to Comey, he's just like, dude, people keep smearing my name. It's not true. I didn't do anything with Russia. And he doesn't understand that there's this entire apparatus behind him. And Schumer was absolutely right when he said, you know, Trump doesn't know what he's getting into talking about the intel community. He was right. He didn't, you know.
Yeah.
And so what happened then is Comey then, as a result of being fired, he says, oh, this is terrible. So he leaks a bunch of documents notes that he took, which are FBI documents, some of which were classified. He leaks them to his lawyer buddy, who then goes to the press with this information. He says his reason for doing that is to get a special counsel appointed. And it just so happens that not only does it work, but his friend and mentor, Bob Mueller, is appointed.
Yeah.
Now, how much sense? That's the start of the investigation. By the way, Comey then goes on to lie to Congress, saying, nope, they asked him straight up, have you ever been the source of any leaks that went to the media of classified information? He says, no, I wasn't. That's a lie. Right. So there's another guy that lied to the FBI. Why doesn't he get the same treatment that Cohen has? Why shouldn't he be getting locked up, you know? Let's see if he'll flip on someone.
It's really kind of depressing that nobody's really standing up for these people, but you can't blame them, because if they do, their head could be on the chopping block next. And I think that's what a lot of this is about. It's about threatening people.
That's right. And, you know, for example, Carter Page, who was spied on, like, let's look at him. What was his crime? In order to get the FISA application against Carter Page, they had to say not just that there was a chance, they had to have proof that it was most likely that he was operating as an agent of Russia. Not just he was an unwilling dupe. And they literally were calling this guy a Russian spy. Well, after spying on him for a year and a half, getting access to all of his information, being under the spotlight for that long, they still have not one iota of a crime they could charge that guy with.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So don't we have a problem? Shouldn't the threshold for spying on a presidential campaign be pretty damn high and not based off of opposition research from the other campaign?
Any other time, yes.
Well, picture this. Like, what's to stop Trump? Let's say, I mean, pick your poison. Who runs against him in 2020? Let's just say Elizabeth Warren wins the nomination.
Yeah.
Which seems very unlikely. But
Let's hope.
To stop Trump from being like, you know, we hired a British spy to go talk to Chinese people, Chinese officials, and the Chinese officials told us that, yeah, actually Elizabeth Warren is working with the Chinese to steal the election. So now we're going to send spies into her campaign. We're going to wiretap a bunch of people, and we're going to have investigations that go years long. How could any objectionable person be like, yeah, that's not acceptable if they thought that what happened to the Trump campaign was acceptable?
Right.
It is literally the exact same thing. You're giving Trump, who you're calling this crazy authoritarian fascist, the power to literally use the FBI as his own campaign machine.
Right.
That's it. That's what they're doing.
And that's what I thought about that too. It's like you're setting a precedent here, but it's just they just don't think it's going to be able to be used against them, and I think it's just because they're used to the media being on their side, and so that's powerful, you know?
That's exactly right. That's why when I talk about the establishment, the media is their mouthpiece. It's such a crucial part. It's ironic because when the media when the media is out there beating their chests about like, well, we're so important to democracy and we're so important to the country. Yes, you're right. Ideally, that was exactly how it's supposed to work. But you're failing miserably in your job and you're acting as a mouthpiece for the establishment and for the intel community. And so that gives them so much cover. If the average person knew just half of what like we've been talking about here, they'd be like, wait, what? That's really going on? Yes, that's really going on.
Yep.
Here's another one, right? The Russia investigation, the start of it. We're led to believe that this was basically the biggest non-militaristic attack on our country, like probably in decades, right?
Oh, it's
this
like Pearl Harbor.
Could have stolen an election, right? There were actually Democrats saying this is reason for war. Like we should, a nuclear superpower we should go to war with over this, right? That's what Democrats are saying. So here's their claim. They say it's that important. Well, when the computers got hacked for the DNC, the FBI's policy is to go in and look at the physical servers and then take that information. They get a request to do that, and the Democrats say, no thanks. We'll hire our own firm to send you copies. That doesn't even pass the smell test.
Right.
You were just attacked by a foreign nation, and what you're saying was the biggest attack that's ever happened to a political campaign. The FBI comes in to look at it, and you go, nah, we're cool. Why would you do that?
Right.
Well, maybe because you have something to hide.
Right.
Or maybe because things aren't as they said. So there's just no way. If that's true, if the story that we're being fed is true, there is no explanation for, one, why the Democrats would say, no, the FBI can't look at our servers. And second, the FBI wouldn't say, we insist. Sorry. This is a matter of national security. The fact that neither of that happened, you know that this Russia stuff's garbage. That's one of the things Jimmy Dore, who we were talking about earlier, he's like, I knew it was garbage from the get-go. As soon as they were like, nope, you can't look at the servers, he's like, yep, this is absolute garbage.
Yeah,
like,
that was one of my
there's no reason to think
Well, I mean, ultimately, any of this really is going to accomplish is it's either going to destroy Trump or it won't, and it's going to continue to solidify the division of this country. Half the country is going to have no faith in the institutions, the other half. And really, I think we both know that's going to switch depending on, at least it used to switch depending on who's in power, but now with the media acting like they are, it seems like it's going to be one way all the time. But
yeah, and you're absolutely right. The last thing that I'll say, I promise, about the Mueller investigation is, so then with all of that, it's like, okay, there's a lot of shadiness, but what about Mueller himself? Well, he's stacked with a bunch of Democrats and all this. Here's the most important thing to understand why Mueller's corrupt. This is when I knew it happened. You had this Peter Strzok guy who worked for the FBI, who we talked about earlier, who had all these anti-Trump texts. He goes to work from the FBI to Mueller's team. Now, Peter Strzok's given a phone by the FBI. It's a Samsung Galaxy 5. That's where we start to see all of these text messages coming about Trump. You have what's called the IG. He's the Inspector General. The IG was actually requested to start to look into these investigations by the Democrats, believe it or not, because the Democrats were fuming at James Comey for coming out 3 days before the election and saying, actually, we found these emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop, so Hillary's under investigation again. Which, by the way, not to get off the weeds, but the only reason they did that was because they had to, because whistleblowers in the FBI started to report they sat in those emails for 2 months in an attempt to run out the clock. So Comey basically had no choice. But anyways, so the Democrats are furious, and they demand someone else investigates. So the IG, like for those of you that don't know what it is, it's like internal affairs, you know, if for the police. So it's basically a guy that's looking into the intel community. And he starts to look into stuff and he finds all these crazy text messages on this FBI phone. And so he goes to Mueller before he released this information to the public. And he says, hey, Mueller, you know, one of your top lieutenants you hired, this Peter Strzok guy, dude, look at these crazy texts. It's going to look really bad for you. This guy's extremely biased. Yeah. And so Mueller does the right thing, right? He gets rid of Strzok, which makes sense. Strzok had been working for him for about a month. And then Lisa Page was his lover he was texting. They got rid of her too eventually. But where it becomes shady is it now turns out the IG just
not to interrupt you, but then they just kind of disappear. You stop hearing about them. They just sort of gone. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. And what becomes shady is when they started working for Mueller's team, they got different phones. These are iPhones, not Samsungs. And they got those phones and they worked with them, and then Mueller eventually let them go. But what ends up happening is it turns out that the IG just released a report that's like, here's what happened with the FBI phones. There was a glitch with the FBI phones, so a lot of Strzok and Page's text messages were lost. And people were up in arms because it seemed shady. And it is shady. Just so happens the text messages that showed shadiness were, you know, deleted by a glitch.
Oh,
but thankfully the IG was able to get most of it back. And so the IG releases his reports like, yeah, these Samsung Galaxies, there was a glitch. We were able to get most of the information back, blah, 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 blah. Then the very next paragraph he says, however, they were also given iPhones by Mueller's team. We tried to retrieve the data on those. In both Strzok and Page's case, the data was wiped clean. This is after the IG went to Mueller and said, look, these people were engaged in really shady behavior. Mueller clearly relieved because he fired Strzok from the team. Yet he deleted the evidence. Now, why would he do that? He knew that the IG was looking at these text messages and wanted all the relevant information, but he deleted it. Yeah. Now, anti-Trumpers and Mueller defenders will say, oh, but the evidence is backed up somewhere. That's their policy. It turns out because Mueller's a special counselor, he's not held by the same restrictions of the FBI and doesn't have to back up data. So the only chance you have of getting the data at this point is to go to the actual providers like Verizon or whatever it was through.
Right.
And Verizon said, we actually only keep records for up to 5 days. So the data is gone.
It's done.
We have no idea at the most crucial point of the Trump-Russia investigation what was going on between these people. At the same time, it started to come out. Now, keep in mind, Strzok was the agent that did the interview of Flynn, which Flynn was ultimately said to be lying. Strzok came out of the interview with Flynn and said, I don't think this guy is lying. Something happened in the month when he started working with Mueller where they decided, oh, actually, he was lying and charged him. And we can't see the text messages from that point in time.
Yep.
That is unbelievably corrupt. If that happened in any other administration, the media would be screaming to the sky. But with Mueller, it's like, no, he's legit.
It's gone into the dustbin of history that most people will never even know about.
That's right. Like you explain this to people, so I'm like on ATS and other places explaining this, and I don't know if it's willful ignorance or if it's too confusing. Person after person after person telling me, well, the IG report says right here that they recovered the text. And I'm like, that's from the Samsungs that were issued by the FBI, not Mueller's issued iPhones.
Yeah.
And they're just like, what's no big deal? Who cares? And, you know, you hear Alan Dershowitz, who's a lawyer. He's always on TV. He said, and he's basically defending Trump, even though he's a left-wing person who voted for Hillary. And he has what he calls the other shoe test. It's like, when you hear stuff like this, put the shoe on the other foot and be like, if this was Trump investigating, or a special counsel for Trump investigating Democrats, and this type of stuff was occurring, what would the Democrats say? And they would be going ballistic. You know they would.
Yeah, and not to go off another tangent here, but the loss of the convenient loss of data really reminds me of when Louis Lerner was being investigated, and they were talking to the head of the IRS, and they tried to get her hard drives, and he's like, oh. And look this up on YouTube. Go look up the head of the IRS when he was being questioned about Louis Lerner's hard drives. He's like, oh, I can't provide him. We had a hard drive crash. And it's like, well, okay, even if that's true, okay, there's data on other hard drives. And beyond that, you should have ultra redundant backups anyway. And so when he's sitting there saying that, yeah,
you know way more about tech than me, but just as a layman, it's like... Really? That's how, like, God forbid we had, like, actual important espionage information or something that's important for national security of the United States. What, we got, like, one floppy drive with that information on it? Nothing's getting backed up?
Right. And if it was on the other shoe, if it was the IRS investigating somebody and they didn't have the backups, well, that's their ass. Not with the
That's
IRS,
right.
though. Unfortunately for the rest of us, but
For me, like 9/11 was like my first foray into what I would call the conspiracy world, but I really wasn't not a big conspiracy theorist in the general sense of the word. But for me, the real eye opener for me was the Waco situation, which I won't get too in the weeds with this, but there's a documentary. It's called Waco Rules of Engagement, which I recommend everyone watch. And I'm not trying to defend David Koresh or the Branch Davidians or anything like that, but it's really, and we have all these like. It's a cultural joke at this point, like David Koresh. Really, it's a tragedy. I think it was something like 17 children were killed. They weren't just killed, by the way. Like, but when people like want to joke around about this, they were put into a kind of like a bunker, basically a food pantry, while the fire and the shooting went on. And actually, there was so much tear gas been thrown in there. Which, by the way, the FBI knew that there were children in there. They threw so much tear gas in there that it actually acted as strychnine. And so when they found the corpses of the kids, not only were they burnt, but it turned out they died before they burned alive because their muscles had contracted so much that it broke their bones. One of the most painful ways you can imagine dying, like 3 to 8 year olds dying this way, Jesus. 17 of them. I don't know the exact number, but it's horrific. And when they asked the FBI afterwards, they said, why did you do this? And the FBI's response was, we thought that if they were loving parents and we started to harm their children, they would come out. Now, can you imagine that? Because on the other hand, the FBI is saying, well, they're a bunch of religious cultist nuts. So why would you intentionally harm children?
Right.
I mean, it's asinine. So but the real reason I bring this up is David Koresh starts hanging up in the middle of the shooting. What happened was, for those that don't know, the ATF tried to serve a warrant. They came in, they started shooting. There's a conflict, and the ATF basically got their butt kicked. And so they had to fly the white flag. David Koresh and his compound let them leave. And then the FBI came in and after a big standoff took care of business and killed them all. But David Koresh and them are holding up out the window. They're putting bed sheets that they wrote on saying, we can't get in touch with 911. We want a lawyer. Call a lawyer. Like we can't. And so finally they get a hostage negotiator kind of, well, I don't know hostage, but a negotiator. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about it. And David Koresh, you can find the audio. It's on this documentary I'm talking about. And Koresh is saying, look, when they take the evidence, when you see our front door, you'll see bullet holes coming in through the front door, which is illegal. That's what the ATF did when they came. It's illegal for federal agents to shoot through a closed door like that because there could be kids on the other side, which there were in this case. And so Koresh is like, this is going to back me up that they started this. They engaged in illegal activity. That's what the entire fight. We were just defending ourselves. We did nothing wrong. Then there's footage of them after the building burnt down, taking that door and putting it into an evidence van. What do you think happened with that evidence? Oops, it got lost.
Yep. A door.
That's exactly what happened.
Where'd the door go?
And you see that FBI over and over. It's always, anytime there's like someone says, look, here's some exculpatory evidence. Oh, sorry, we lost that. We lost Lerner's hard drives. Sorry, we smashed all of Hillary's email stuff. You can't see any of that. Sorry, they destroyed the evidence. Sorry, we deleted Strzok and Page's text. Oops. And you're just like, that would never fly. If you did that, if me or you did anything like that, deleted evidence like that, we'd be in jail tomorrow.
Yeah. And it's not even necessarily political, although it seems that way right now because of the current circumstances, but it's just like an establishment thing. It's like they can just wield this power whenever they choose.
That's why freedom of information requests are basically ignored all the time.
Right.
An agency that even if you're a Democrat, you should at least tip your cap to is Judicial Watch, who's fighting every day with tons of lawyers like, we want to see these documents. We want to see these documents. They're all about transparency and getting these documents out there. But the FBI just lies, just tooth and nail. They'll say, no, we can't do it. Like at one point, the FBI said it was going to take, I wish I knew the exact numbers on this better, but they basically said it was going to take like 10 years to get all the information that Judicial Watch won in court they were going to be allowed to get. And they said that it's because they could basically only go through like 1,000 emails a day. And there were so many, I think it was like Hillary's emails. They can only go through 1,000 a day. So, but juxtapose that. That's their argument with giving Judicial Watch the freedom of information documents. But when it came to Hillary's emails that were on Weiner's laptop, there were hundreds of thousands of them, they were able to go through them in 3 days.
Yeah, right.
And it's just like, this doesn't add up. It doesn't. Now, I have had left-wing people that told me, well, yes, but in the interest of fairness, they were able to use like a duplicate program and things like that and able to roll out a lot of but nonetheless, 3 days, this is supposedly like the two biggest investigations the FBI's had politically in the history of their existence. And you go through some of the most crucial pieces of evidence in 3 days. Can you imagine if Mueller's investigation would have been 3 days into Trump?
Oh, jeez.
The Democrats screaming their heads off. You know,
well,
with him, it's take our time.
Right. Well, if it was 3 days, that would defeat the purpose, right? I mean, the purpose is for it to last through the whole administration. I mean, that's
right.
What it's for.
And so it's what it's going to be is one of the things I disagree with Trump on is, and his supporters, a lot of them, they'll say, "Oh, well, wait." Set up because he's going to declassify, like, for example, the FISA application. Basically, he's sitting on a bunch of redacted stuff, and Trump has the power to unilaterally be like, look, we're going to unredact it and leave the American people see it. He should do that, but he's waiting to use it as a strategic moment. Now, if your number one interest is Trump getting reelected, then that's good. But if your number one interest is like me, it's just like, I just want to see the truth. I just want corruption punished. Then release it now. Like, don't hold it until it's strategically beneficial to you. Just release it now. That's my opinion. A lot of Trump people disagree with me. They think, I think they're more concerned with Trump winning than I am.
I'm with you. I stand on exactly like you. It's like if she's done something, then get him for it. You know.
That's right.
But let's see this. The thing that holds me back on that a little bit is that I think we all know that it will, no matter what, it's not going to be consistently applied. It's not going to be, as long as the current situation continues.
Well, and that's the other thing that, like, people ask me, you know, well, so many of your videos are on the Russia collusion, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'll be flat out with you. I'm not one of these lock her up people. You know, if Hillary broke the law, which she no doubt did, she should be held accountable.
Right.
But that's so less important to me, Hillary or Trump or any of these individuals named. It's less important to me that they get locked up for these crimes. Again, I stand by if they broke the law, it should be applied to them.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned with an investigative and intelligence agency that is the most powerful that the world has ever seen, acting in corrupt manners to decide who becomes the elected officials in the United States. That is more election interference than Russia could ever hope to accomplish.
Absolutely.
So I want to get to the bottom of that. That's why it's so important. Because let's say you're like I like Ron Paul. He was my favorite candidate that ever ran. I hate the foreign wars. The Democrats used to be with me on that, by the way. What chance does he ever have again electing in this current system? None.
Zero.
Or if you like Jill Stein, who's on the left, you know, totally different than Ron Paul, though also anti-war. What chance does she have? Well, I'll tell you what chance he has. Did you know that along with General Flynn, Jill Stein at one point attended a dinner for Russia Today that Vladimir Putin was at?
Yep.
Well, she was being looked at by the FBI that even her getting smeared. What'd she get, like 2% of the vote? Yep. And she's being smeared as a Russian operative. And so I keep telling these people that are like, they're laughing like, I don't care about this corruption. I don't want to hear about it. Trump's so dirty. Just get him. It's like, be careful what you wish for. Because when there's a real progressive, you think Bernie's going to get elected? You only see them. They already smeared him once. And to the point where he would be able to get elected, it's because he'll bow down to them. Yeah. But other than that, and you're never going to see an outsider person. So I hope you like the same agenda that the intel community has, because that's what you're going to see more of. And that includes regime change wars. That includes bailing out bankers. That includes making sure that no one gives two hoots about the middle class. That's the type of people you're going to consistently see. So even if you're a fan of socialism, you ain't going to get it, because the intel community is going to make sure that that doesn't happen. That's why every single person should be fed up with this, even if you hate Trump. But they're not. The team tribalism is so strong. It's just like, Trump's on the other team. Screw him. Do whatever you can to get him. We'll worry about the rest later. And I'm sorry. I'm not willing to sacrifice my personal integrity, you know, to cheer for corruption just because it's targeted at someone I don't like.
Absolutely. I think you just summed it up perfectly. That's the situation that we're in right now. And it doesn't give me a lot of hope. But I try to be, I try not to be a pessimist, but it doesn't look good. But, hey, man, I've had a really awesome talk with you tonight.
Me too.
It's been really good. I think I hope you get lots of subs. You deserve it. I think you're going to be a big YouTuber going forward. And I encourage everybody to go subscribe to Robert. I put his link in there. I'll put it in there some more. I'll put in the description on the video that posts. But and I'm going to have you on more if you want to do it. And
we'll
absolutely continue this talk.
Just to plug myself real quick, I'll probably be doing a live stream tomorrow, probably by myself at noon Eastern time on my channel. But yeah, I had a great time. I would love to come back. I think that the way you do your videos are so like I'm not trying to emulate them like totally. But what I love about your videos, you're so polished. You're so much more concise than me. I disagree
100%, but I thank you.
So I'm trying to take lessons. I really am. But it's good to have just different people. It's good to talk to people that aren't in this bubble of the mainstream media. And it's good to know that there's other people out. Like, the last thing I'll say is about being pessimistic. Yeah, like, about the administration and stuff I am. But I'm optimistic because we have people, like hundreds of thousands of people are watching your videos. You know, the alternative media, I think, is picking up. And I think that's ultimately the key to being able to finally crack into this.
I 100% agree. And, Robert, I'm glad that I met you, and I look forward to future discussions for sure.
All right, man. Yeah, it's great to meet you too. I'm gonna go. My wife's gonna kill me because we haven't had dinner yet, so I'll text you later. Here. Thanks again.
All right, thanks, Robert. Have a good night, man. Thanks everybody for watching. Go subscribe to Robert and keep coming back.